It's my pleasure now to introduce our third co-organizer and moderator, Professor Bryan Brooks. Professor Brooks is a distinguished professor of environmental science and public health and director for the Environmental Health Science Program at Baylor University. He specializes in understanding and managing anthropogenic stresses in rapidly urbanizing regions. His research focuses on water quality, water reuse, comparative toxicology, sustainable molecular design, and the risk of contaminants. He's also the editor-in-chief of Environmental Science and Technology Letters. Dr. Brooks also leads global initiatives like the Horizon Scanning Project and the CDC's Uncover EH program as well. He's authored over 200 publications and delivered lots of keynotes around the world, contributed to the science-based approaches for sustainable environmental quality and public health, and the One Health approach that we heard about already. So Bryan, thank you so much for being part of this summit, and we're really looking forward to your panel on nature-based solutions.
Thanks a lot, Adelina. It's absolutely a pleasure to be with you today. And as we think about the topic of panel 3, I was really excited to be involved with this because, nature is the best engineer. And we're trying to put chemistry to work to help us achieve clean water for all people, right? And how can we actually embrace not just technological innovations, but how they're coupled with nature-based solutions? And so we have some tremendous speakers I'll be introducing in a few minutes. But if we think about where we are, we're aiming to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And not sure if I can advance the slides. It's like I'm having a little bit of challenge there with the slide advancing. Oh, there they are. Yeah, and so it's all about the SDGs, right? And so we want to achieve drinking water, but we also want to maintain biodiversity and ecosystem services that support our needs as a society. And I guess the advancing the slides is still moving a little bit slower here for me. So there we go. Yeah. So within the journals, ES&T and ES&T Letters, just in the last year, we've published special issues on accelerating environmental research to achieve the SDGs. And of course, across the ACS environment sustainability portfolio, you see lots of different topics being published in each issue. And of course, we're so thankful for the community of authors and reviewers that contribute to our community. But we have a lot of challenges to achieve these SDGs, right? We have chemical challenges you've been hearing about. Some authors are identifying that we've exceeded Earth system boundaries for novel entities or human-made chemicals. There is the potential development of an intergovernmental science policy panel on chemicals, waste, and pollution prevention. This would be similar to an IPCC, a UN-level panel on climate change. We'll see where this all goes. But the reality is that we know there's at least over 350,000 chemicals that have been registered for commercial use around the world. That's the public-facing information. More chemicals are being made every year, and these lists are growing. Yet we don't have empirical information to be able to robustly assess the risk than really more than a few thousand. At the same time, we have challenges that are related to biodiversity losses that are profound, right? I mean, we're seeing biodiversity decrease now faster than any other time in history. And this is habitat. A number of different factors are driving these trajectories, but chemicals and wastes are part of that challenge. Climate change, of course, is a major factor. We're going to have to understand risk. We're going to have to shape our interventions and really adaptively manage as we go forward. Realizing the new normals are seen everywhere. Think about some of the work that we're doing with the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, and think about how can we equip communities to be more resilient, be more ready, to be able to build back better, because impacts from disasters are increasing around the world, and that's affecting our basic functions, right? Think about the community here that we're talking about with clean water. If you ever want to relay to your colleagues the importance of maybe just environmental science, technology, and health in general, remember the survival sciences and the rule of 3. You can go about 3 minutes without air, about 3 days without water, about 3 weeks if you're lucky, 30 days without food. disasters are challenging how we go about things. And so the point is of this panel is we've been very fortunate to have several outstanding colleagues join us to discuss what is the reality on this planet. We need sustainable solutions for water treatment, conservation, and climate resilience, and putting chemistry to work for clean water in new and innovative ways, and harnessing nature's the best engineer. Nature-based solutions truly represent a fantastic opportunity for innovation, but scaling opportunities across locations with different developmental status. And so enough of me. Let's go on to the main course. And it's my pleasure to introduce David Sedlak, who's the Plato Milozimov Distinguished Professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Director of the Berkeley Water Center at UC Berkeley, where he conducts research on the fate, transport, and transformation of chemical contaminants in water systems. David has made many contributions over the years. He's a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and chairs its Water Science and Technology Board. David, I'll advance the slides for you. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your comments.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Brian, and I apologize in advance if I have too many animations in my slides and drive you crazy, but that's the way it is. I'm very happy to be here in front of this global audience to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about, and that's the potential for using nature-based systems to address some of our most pressing water needs. And as Brian said, nature-based systems have a great deal of promise because in addition to addressing issues related to water quantity and quality, they provide opportunities for biodiversity enhancement, recreational opportunities, flood control, and a number of other ecosystem services that we don't normally see with our engineered treatment systems. However, they've been slow to be adopted in part because of a lack of knowledge. And what I'd like to try to talk about today is the water quality and specifically the chemical contaminant aspect of this, and as it relates to constructed wetlands. So we can hear about subsurface systems later, and I think Megan will talk some about that. But I want to give you examples from my research of this. So let's start by looking at some watershed scale nature-based solutions. So when people talk about watershed scale solutions for these kinds of problems, they normally think of a constructed wetland as a small little project that might be behind the local sewage treatment plant or at the local park. But these things are being built increasingly at the size of entire watersheds. So let me give you two examples. The first example is the Prado Constructed Wetlands Complex in Southern California. This is a 198 hectare site that treats something like 200,000 cubic meters of water per day, essentially half the flow of the effluent dominated Santa Ana River, a river that has treated wastewater going into it and a host of contaminants. It was designed initially because the levels of nitrate in the river were above the drinking water MCL, and the water district, Orange County Water District, found that the cost of that system in terms of its removal of nitrate was only about 5% of the cost of building a conventional drinking water treatment plant with nitrate removal capacities with ion exchange. And so this project's been running for close to 30 years now and has been very successful. And my second example comes from Texas, just outside of Dallas, the George W. Shannon Wetland Center. It's even bigger than the site in Orange County because everything in Texas is bigger, as Brian knows. It's an 800 hectare site treating about 340,000 cubic meters of water per day before sending that water from the effluent dominated Trinity River back into the drinking water reservoir for the city of Dallas. So it's a circular water system where the wastewater is treated in the wetland and then goes back into the reservoir. And this system removes about 95% of the sediments from a very heavily sediment-laden river and about half of the nutrients, resulting in a decrease in natural organic matter and algal toxins in the river water. And compared to the equivalent cost of building a reservoir and a dam to do the same things, it was only about a quarter of the price. Now, I've studied these systems. Please don't go to the next slide yet. I've studied these systems for a number of years, thinking that maybe they would also be good at removing chemical contaminants, but as a result of a couple of dissertations worth of research, we saw that they're actually not very good at removing trace organic contaminants. So we set out to develop new types of constructed wetlands that were better equipped to remove chemical contaminants by using principles of environmental chemistry and engineering design. I'll show two of them to you today. Next slide, please. The first one is the open water unit process wetlands. And what you can see here is the pilot scale system, or maybe demonstration scale system, that we built in the corner of the Prado wetland complex in Orange County. You can see that inlet was taken from an aerial photo of the system. And it's a large system, and it's got these shallow basins where the sunlight goes into the water. And next, click again, Brian. And what you can see is that there's a layer of algae on the bottom, and then there's this clear water at the top. And in the clear water, the sunlight goes through the water and photodegrades organic contaminants and inactivates pathogens. And then that microbial community living in the biomap on the bottom is dominated by diatoms, and those diatoms have some very special capabilities. Click again, please. The diatoms are capable of removing nitrate quite effectively, as effectively as the surface flow wetlands, through a combination of denitrification and Animox reactions in the subsurface. Click again. And yeah, and it's also capable of removing trace organic contaminants, pharmaceuticals, and that's a combination of microbial transformation reactions and photochemical reactions. Click again, please. And the open water wetland systems can be paired as a hybrid with engineered treatment systems. So a few years ago, we combined these systems with a pre-ozonation step, a little like what Juliana talked about in Switzerland, as a means of initially breaking down trace organics in municipal wastewater reuse concentrate. That's the material that is produced when membranes are used in water recycling, and is very difficult to treat. The ozonation broke down some of the contaminants, and the wetland broke down the rest. Next slide, please. Another kind of constructed, click please. Yeah, another kind of constructed wetland system that we've developed are subsurface wetlands. Can you go back, please? Go back again, please. Yeah, so you can see here a photograph. I'm sorry about the quality of the graphic on the left-hand side, but this is our subsurface wetland system that we call the horizontal levee. And the Oraloma horizontal levee is a demonstration scale system we built in California, where we put a constructed wetland between the man-made levee, the concrete levee that protects the local community, and the bay. And this protects the constructed levee from storm surges that come as a result of large storms that are becoming increasingly more severe as sea level rises. And what we do with this is we use the vegetation growing on the surface of the levee to absorb the energy of the storm, but we use the subsurface, a gravel and sand layer in the subsurface of the levee, to treat contaminants. And it's not showing up well in the graphic here, but the flow in there, it flows through, the water flows through a layer of gravel and sand with wood chips in it, and the wood chips serve as a substrate for microbes that degrade contaminants. Next slide, please. Or next click. So what we've seen in this system is that the nitrate is very well removed at the very entrance to the subsurface system through denitrification and a small amount of plant uptake, because the plants put their roots down into the gravel and sand layer. Next slide, please. The trace organic contaminants, the pharmaceuticals, are also quite well removed by biotransformation. And what really surprised us in these systems is that because we have iron reducing and sulfate reducing conditions throughout most of the wetland, we see some of the more recalcitrant contaminants, things like carbamazepine, being degraded by the microbes in the subsurface. And that's something that we normally don't see in sewage treatment plants, and we normally don't see in surface flow constructed wetlands. Next, please. We also see that this is a very interesting system for studying the uptake of trace organic contaminants into plants and their exposure for wildlife. And we've seen that, like, we've led to the conclusion that some of the riparian zones around effluent dominated rivers might be a source of exposure for wildlife. And next slide, please. And now we're currently studying the removal of trace metals and PFAS in these subsurface wetlands by adding different types of geomedia to the subsurface to enhance the uptake of those more difficult to remove contaminants. Next slide, please. So in terms of future opportunities, I see several places where researchers and practitioners might use this kind of knowledge in the future. What you see in front of you is a picture of one of the sponge cities that's been built in China. This is a concept for capturing floodwaters that might otherwise overwhelm a city and restoring landscape and providing amenities for people. These systems might be engineered to also remove trace contaminants using some of the same principles I've talked about for the open water wetlands. Next slide, please. The problem of non-point source pollution from agriculture and from stormwater runoff is something that might be quite amenable to the subsurface and surface wetlands that I talked about. And finally, one more time. And the riparian buffers on the edges of our streams have the potential to be engineered because they look a lot like those subsurface wetlands I was talking about. And by amending them with the proper types of geomedia and operating them with the types of conditions that we've learned about in our subsurface wetland studies, we can use them to more effectively remove pesticides and organic contaminants from water. And that's it for my remarks. I'd love to pass it on to the others and hear what they have to say.
All right, thank you, David. I'm having a little bit of technical glitches, so hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And I'm not seeing my slides yet, but there might be a delay. So I'm going to speak about the Orange County Water District, which is where I work, and build on David's discussion about wetlands. We also have, we have some of those constructed wetlands that he referred to on one of his slides. And really our water supply here in North and Central Orange County in Southern California is a hybrid system of natural treatment systems, a few types, with engineered treatment systems. So I want to tell our story and show you how the chemistry fits in. Next slide. Might be a delay just for me. So I think my next slide is about, yes, managed aquifer recharge. So we are actually a groundwater management agency because this part of Orange County, the north central part, is heavily reliant on groundwater. That's a good thing in the sense that it's a local water supply. We're not as dependent on imported water as other parts of Southern California, although we do bring in some imported water to make up the balance. But it's about 90% groundwater for the drinking water supply here for 2.5 million people. But with all those people, with the population having grown over time, the natural groundwater that refills from rainfall isn't enough to keep up with demand. And so we do managed aquifer recharge. It's really the heart of what we do. It's also called artificial recharge, groundwater replenishment. So this is where you take another water source that you may have more readily available and essentially allow it to percolate down into the ground like rainfall would, or you can inject it and sort of refill that groundwater system so that all the cities can continue pumping that water to make a water supply. So in the background of this photo, you can see the river, the Santa Ana River that flows through our region and out to the ocean. But before we lose that fresh water to the ocean, we divert much of it into spreading ponds like shown in this image to allow that water to slow down and sink into the ground. Next slide. Here's another view of the Santa Ana River, which itself also is a losing stream in the sense that it percolates down into the groundwater system. So we like that. We want to capture that fresh water. But while this project originally began in the 1930s, doing the recharge with the river water, it began, simply as river water, right? Water collected from the watershed. Over time, the base flows of this river system became dominated by wastewater or used water effluent, which David alluded to. So upstream communities in upstream counties inland of us are treating their, used water or wastewater, it's called, in sewage treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants to a level of quality that's suitable for environmental discharge. And then it's discharged as an effluent to the river. It flows downstream. Well, that's where we are collecting this water for recharge. So we're essentially capturing what's mostly now treated municipal water, used water discharges, and recharging that into the ground. So it's sometimes that's called like a de facto potable reuse because it is a reuse or recycling of water. Next slide. The good news for us is that the river system itself and constructed wetlands along this system help to clean this water before it reaches our recharge basins. This image shows the Santa Ana River coming in from the northeast, flowing to the bottom left of the photo is out to the ocean. But it passes through the large system of constructed wetlands that David showed on his slide called the Prado Constructed Wetland System. About half of the river flow we divert into this system. The rest continues on down the river through, you can see there, riparian forest collected behind Prado Dam, and then it's slowly released through the dam into the river system and flows down to us for recharge into the groundwater system. So we actually built these wetlands recognizing that it would provide the water purification benefits we needed. Nitrogen levels were relatively high in the river because of those treated used water discharges, which is a concern for this water later becoming a drinking water supply. And wetlands can do a great job removing nitrate. So we see significant removal through this system. The land area was previously agriculture, later actually some duck hunting ponds. So it was a duck hunting facility. And we had an opportunity to purchase those lands and convert it into a constructed wetland system. So like a man-made wetland system to slow the water down and take advantage of the natural attenuation processes that occur in systems like this, like David talked about, that can remove contaminants from water. Next slide. So we constructed this facility. Here's another view of the wetland system in the 1990s and have been operating it ever since, which requires, vegetation management. Sometimes berms get washed out in storms, that sort of thing. So it's an active maintenance to keep the system going and see those benefits of water purification. Next slide. Something happened with my graphics here. Maybe it'll appear with the next click. No, okay. For me, I'm not seeing the text, but that's okay. It's coming through now. All right. So David talked about nitrate. I talked about the nitrate removal. There's also trace organics present in used or wastewater effluent discharges. And wetlands can do a good job of removing those as well. And David talked about, the work and science of trying to understand how to improve these constructed wetland systems. But this is just another example of a very recent study that was done. We frequently open our doors to have this system act as a test bed for university research. And so UC Riverside recently completed a study of neonicotinoid insecticides, demonstrating how much was able to be removed by the wetland in different wetland cells shown in the different colors in the box plot there, with the overall inlet to outlet ranging anywhere from, an average of about 60%, you can see. So sometimes as high as 90%, sometimes as low as 20%. So not complete removal, but still a significant improvement in overall water quality. And there's a combination of processes that can, for depending on the contaminant, that can lead to that removal, whether it's biodegradation, sorption to sediments, plant uptake, even photolysis, where in ponds less covered by vegetation, if you clear that vegetation and keep it as an open water system, as was researched, and the data with some information was shown there by David on that. It's a type of design to encourage photolysis. There are ways to better engineer these systems to really maximize the contaminant removal. Next slide. So I wanted to kind of summarize what the overall picture of our water supply in North and Central Orange County for 2.5 million people. This is how we get our water. We collect it on the left side of my image there in this river, the water in this river system coming, that's really dominated by used water discharges from sewage treatment plants from different counties upstream of us. And about half that water flow from the river, we improve its water quality through managed constructed wetland system. The other half continues on down the river, which also enjoys natural treatment processes within the river flows. And then I explained that we recharge this water into the ground. What I didn't talk about was in the process of doing managed aquifer recharge, when that water filters down through into the ground, I just said filters, right? So that also cleans the water. Those down, those orange arrows pointed straight down there. So when that, those man-made ponds, when that water percolates down, there's absorption of contaminants to the soils and biodegradation processes that occur. So we see significant improvement in water quality there as well. So then eventually, after a few months or longer of underground travel time, the water is pumped out by cities to be used as drinking water supply. And then when they then generate their used water out of sewage treatment plants, we actually capture all of that water to recycle it. And we pass that through an advanced water purification system that we operate, a potable reuse facility. Ours uses reverse osmosis membranes, which we talked about in the first panel this morning. And that purified water we use to actually augment the water, the river water going into these groundwater recharge basins. So we have a bit of a loop there. And what is not shown here is that we aren't quite able to depend on just these supplies. We do have to bring in a little bit of imported water as well to augment water into the recharge basins. But that imported water portion of our overall water supply portfolio is getting smaller over time, which is a good thing, given that it's costly to bring in water from faraway regions. And I believe that's my last slide. How could I forget PFAS? I did want to make one remark that it's not all so rosy. The natural attenuation of various constituent substances, chemicals present in our water supplies through nature-based treatment systems, whether it's soil aquifer treatment during recharge or wetland systems, can't remove 100% of everything. And PFAS is an example of that. So not all anthropogenic contaminants are removed through natural treatment. We do have PFAS present in this river water supply because it is commonly found in used water effluents. And I mentioned the river is dominated by such discharges. So it is measurable in our system at quite low concentrations, but above regulatory limits of concern for drinking water quality. And so we are adding more engineered treatment to that image that I showed on the prior slide, where at these sites where the groundwater is pumped out to supply water to the different communities in our region, some of those sites require additional filtration we're using ion exchange. So ion exchange adsorption is the mechanism to remove PFAS from the water supply. This is a pretty major impact for our region, given that groundwater is a key source of water for us. So to have this impact of PFAS is something that we've been working very hard on for the last few years and building the treatment facilities now. So thank you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I appreciate the invitation to be here from ASC and from Bryan. My name's Todd Bridges. I joined the faculty in the College of Engineering at the University of Georgia in 2023 and our Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems after I concluded a 30-year career with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the United States. And my approach to thoughts I'm going to share with you that right now come from the kind of infrastructure point of view, or from the physical restructuring and the intersection with how we use chemicals and chemistry today. So the next slide, please. Humans, have done a huge amount of restructuring of the physical environment through history, and quite intensively over the last 200, and in particular over the last 100 years. And this is a significant contributor to what I've laid out here as the three parts of the planetary predicament that we have today. We have hazards such as flooding, coastal storms, drought, extreme heat. These kinds of events are being exacerbated by climate change. It's the second part of the predicament. But the third and a very important part of this predicament is what I've called here landscape or ecosystem transformation. And that is how people have used engineering at very large scales to change the physical environment. And I've given some statistics here focused on the United States to give a sense of this. we constructed largely in the 20th century, and actually just a part of the 20th century, 90,000 dams in the United States that impound 600,000 miles of river. Now, one of the consequences of that, in addition to other activities, is that between the time of our country's founding in 1776 and today, we've lost, destroyed, or eliminated half of our inventory of wetlands in the conterminous 48 states. So in the year of our founding, we had, by best estimates, somewhere around 220 million acres of wetlands in the lower 48 states. Today, we have 110 million acres of wetlands. This has very significant effects on biodiversity, which has already been mentioned. But beyond that, very significant effects on functions that we might liken to engineering, whether we're talking about hydrology or other kinds of functions, some of the processes that David and Megan referenced previously in terms of how we clean or access water. With respect to scale, this is quite important. David mentioned some of the constructed wetland projects, 100 to 800 hectares. But if you consider that the Mississippi River Basin in the United States encompasses more than 1 million square miles, if we want to restore what I would call balance in this physical chemical system, how many acres of wetlands do we need to restore within that basin in order to bring about that balance? I would propose to you, it's millions and millions of acres of wetlands, well beyond the hundreds of hectares of constructed wetlands that we're using today in concert with water treatment facilities. One of the graphic that you see here on the slide comes from a paper that was published in the journal Nature in 2020. And what these authors did is they noted a milestone on planet Earth in the year 2020, where the amount of anthropogenic mass or human-made materials, largely in the form of infrastructure materials on the surface of the planet, now exceeds the total living biomass on planet Earth at more than 1 teraton, 10 to the 12th metric tons, largely in the form of concrete, rock, steel, asphalt. And that curve that you see in that graph, represents the growth of human-made mass on the planet in the 20th century. The doubling rate was 20 years. That's a tremendous amount of physical alteration in our environment that is creating a lot of additional challenges with respect to how we manage and use chemistry. The next slide, please. So with this in mind, I'm kind of noting our human nature here and our tendency to excess. If a little engineering is good, then a lot of engineering would be even better. And I've just referenced what we've done with respect to natural water systems like rivers, but we've done it with other systems as well. The Dust Bowl in the United States in the 1930s, and I have an image here from Stratford, Texas in 1935 showing a dust storm approaching, was precipitated by plowing up more than 30 million acres of native prairie grass in the decades preceding the 1930s in the Southern Plains alone. And that, in concert with a drought and with windstorms, created probably the largest environmental catastrophe in the history of this country in the Dust Bowl. So a physical alteration at very large scale done through, I would say, engineering, in this case, plowing of natural systems that evolved and developed over millennia. Nutrient loading has already been mentioned here. I just have a couple of graphics from, harmful algal blooms on Lake Erie in the United States in 2011, or this map of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico in 2024, which encompasses almost 7,000 square miles of low oxygen dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that is created because of the billions of pounds of phosphorus and nitrogen that are delivered to the Gulf of Mexico through the Mississippi River every year, coming from farm fields in Iowa and other Midwestern states across that more than 1 million acres of the basin. So We have a number of significant challenges here. I reference chemicals of our past that hopefully can teach us lessons today: DDT, PCBs, PFAS. And as we look forward to how we can use, physical and chemical systems together to deliver something better in the future. Next slide, please. So I've introduced this idea of kind of nature positive chemistry in my title slide, but here kind of nature positive approaches in general. And really what I mean by nature positive approaches, these fundamentally are approaches that create natural capital in the form of habitat, biodiversity, and ecosystem goods and services. They're additive in their nature rather than extractive and destructive. They sustain value over the long term. And they seek really to collaborate with nature rather than to control and conquer nature. We need to partner with nature rather than conquer it. I think that's the sustainable path forward. And these ideas have come forward in the modern era through ecological engineering, as advanced by H.T. Odum and his students and his brother, Gene Odum, who was at the University of Georgia in the 1960s, or in the context of landscape architecture, Ian McHarg and the publication of his book, Design with Nature, in 1969. I led a program in the Corps of Engineers that we called Engineering with Nature, the idea of combining these systems together. The White House, a couple of years ago, published a report on the use of nature-based solutions across the country. Regenerative agriculture is an example of this approach as well. So in my last slide, I just wanted to highlight some ways in which we might think about nature positive chemistry, given what has already been stated in our panel today. And I think, in my mind, it's going beyond green chemistry to support productive harmony in the context of how the National Environmental Policy Act in the United States in 1969 framed sustainability. That is, we're trying to create and maintain conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony. That by necessity means I think that we need to look forward to approaches to use and develop nature positive chemistry. And I've given just two very simple examples here. Chemistry that really supports restoring and sustaining nature and nature-based solutions, consistent with the mission of ACS. That is, I'll quote, advancing the broader chemistry enterprises and its practitioners for the benefit of Earth and all its people. So how can we use chemistry to restore and sustain nature? And I've given one example here of use of biopolymers to support root growth and soil adhesion to develop nature positive and nature-based solutions in the environment. I've shown the application to two images here, an untreated soil with plants versus plants, in the case grasses, where the soil was treated with a biopolymer, and showing the difference in soil adhesion to the roots and how this can help reduce erosion during flood and other kinds of events that help accelerate the development of nature-based solutions. And the second example here is how we might develop chemistry, advanced chemistry, and material science in working with natural systems, working with them to sequester carbon. Humans have clearly upset and imbalanced the carbon budget of this planet. How can we use advanced chemistry and materials science to work with natural systems to sequester more carbon, to accelerate the sequestration of carbon in natural systems like wetlands and others? Biochar chemistry and its interaction with soils being just one example of that. There are many other examples of this approach, but I will conclude there and look forward to the questions and answers.
So I think at this point, I'll close by, again, just thanking our fantastic speakers, and we're grateful for your insights, and we look forward to our continued discussion with other colleagues at this special activity in the ACS Spring meeting, which will be held in San Diego, California, not too far down the road from Megan and David. So Adelina, over to you.